Welcome, welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Olivia Cirio. I'm the Italian Spirits Portfolio Ambassador for Campari America. Welcome to the Campari Academy and Drunken Botanist 10th Anniversary Edition celebration today. I am so excited to introduce our presenters. We have Amy Stewart, of course, author and writer of The Drunken Botanist, and we also have Camper English, writer and author of Doctors and Distillers. Camper and Amy are joining me today to talk about the power of plants in food, drink, and medicine, and more as we commemorate the legacy of the 10th anniversary of The Drunken Botanist, which is one of my favorite books. You can use the wisdom shared in this class to score your very own copy of The Drunken Botanist 10th Anniversary Edition and a Campari Academy prize pack by filling out the book raffle entry form at pdxcw.com/thedrunkenbotanist. 10 lucky winners are going to be randomly selected from the entries with the most correct answers, so make sure you answer all the questions. Before we get into it, there are 4 things we would like to ask fans of this content to do. Like PDXCW on Facebook, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, follow them on Instagram, and please comment, engage, ask questions. We're going to put questions up on the screen so that you can get direct answers from these 2 incredibly talented and smart authors. We are so excited to get into this content. Without further ado, I will let Amy and Camper take it away. Amy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm so glad we get to do this.
Yeah, I think this, out of all of the times we've chatted throughout the last decade or so, this might be the longest contiguous conversation that we'll ever have had.
It could be. It could be. So the first time I met you, like I'd already been reading your stuff, but I went to Tales of the Cocktail right when I was just beginning to think about writing this book, and I didn't know anybody, and I felt like a little bit of a fish out of water, because I'm really of the plant world and not so much of the cocktail world. So, but I was standing in line to get into a seminar, and you were next to me in line, and we started talking, and I was like, "Oh, good, I know one person." So you were super friendly and super kind. I appreciate it.
Oh, swell. Yeah. Was that the year that you did the Bark Talk, or did you do the Bark Talk before?
No, this was like the first year I went, so I was like a ways away from having anything to talk about. I was
Cool.
figuring it out.
I remember you did a talk about bark tales,
Yes.
and that I think I had a talk at the same time, so I didn't get to go. I was mad, but that happens every time. The talk I most want to see is the one happening at the same time as the talk I am giving. And
Right. Yeah. I gave a talk well, it was all about trees, and the way that trees end up in whatever we drink. So that could be anything from, an oak that gets made into an oak barrel for maturation of spirits to like resins that get used as sweeteners and things like quinine that come from tree bark and all kinds of stuff like that. So I think we forget about trees, right? We get super interested in herbs and fruit, and it's like, oh yeah, trees have a total role to play here. So yeah, that's what I was doing.
nice. So it's the 10th anniversary. I got mine. I read it. It looks not just bluer, but
Yeah,
also, well, you can see I've taken more notes because
nice,
all of the stuff I missed the first time, I guess, the first
right?
several times that I read the first edition, so many times. Actually, this is one of, I think, only 3 books that I've bought the Kindle version of just because I'm looking at it so much. I just need to be searchable
Sure,
online. And
right.
so it's a reference that I've used this entire time. But besides a new color, we talked probably over a year ago now. You mentioned that the 10th anniversary was coming up, and your publisher was thinking of doing something. So what were you considering, and then what do we have?
Right. So, they reached out to me and said, is there new material you want to add? And I was kind of like, they don't make new plants. I mean, there have not been any new plants in the last 10 years. Of course, what does happen is that maybe a plant that I didn't write about has sort of come into vogue as an ingredient. And so maybe I should say more about it. And I mean, I came up with literally like 3 plants that I could think of where that was the case. And one of them actually was a I think was a sweetener from a tree sap resin. And I thought, oh, I didn't really touch on that one in particular. But the thing about Drunken Botanist, and this is getting a little bit into the weeds on the like mechanics of it all, is that it's very tightly designed with lots of little pictures and sidebars and bits and pieces. And you add a paragraph somewhere and everything reflows after that, or a bunch of it has to reflow. It's kind of tough. So what we decided was that I could add another 8 pages or 16 pages or something like that. And what I decided to do was more on the gardening side. So I just added a bunch of tips for planting a cocktail garden, or for like bars that have a little garden, which some of them do, like a bar that's growing some of their own ingredients. So that's very much like the end of the process, right? It's not all the plants that we use to actually get the alcohol, like grapes or apples or whatever. And it's not all the plants that go into the mix before it's bottled. It's what happens after it comes out of the bottle, right? So how to grow herbs and fruit and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's what I added. Like that's the extra content that's at the end now for the new edition.
I love that. I love the idea of using those herbs and those homegrown things. I've been looking for people to kind of do more things with wild flavors in cocktails. So this is a really cool.
Well, yeah. And, what I tell people about this is think about the things that you can grow that you can't get at the farmer's market or the grocery store. And there's lots of examples of that. Like one of them is scented geraniums are they're kind of like lavender in that they're super fragrant. They are edible, but people don't really cook with them that much. But they're great in cocktails. But you can't walk into a grocery store and get a big handful of scented geranium. So that's a perfect thing to grow yourself because there's no other way you can get it. So you can make a drink at home that literally people can't go get anywhere else. So that's my pitch.
I remember I first read about bartenders trying to grow garnishes and things. Everyone thinks they're going to grow mint, but behind the bar, it's kind of, there's too little, but everywhere else there's too much once you plant it. But there was a Smuggler's Cove, or actually Forbidden Island, Martin Cate's first bar. They were growing borage for their Pimm's cups out in like the parking lot, like up the chain link fence, I think.
Totally. Yeah, it'll grow anywhere. And that's the other thing, of course, you have to pick things that'll really grow. Like right when Drunken Botanist came out, I would hear from like bartenders in LA who were like, we want to grow sloes. We want to make our own sloe gin and we want to grow our own sloes. And I'm like, dude, not in LA. Like that's a Pacific Northwest, English countryside kind of plant. Meanwhile, I'd hear from someone in Seattle who was like, I want to grow my own sugar cane. And I'm like, you got to go to LA for that. Like you guys need to talk to each other a little bit here. Cause it's the secret to success is of course, grow the stuff that wants to grow where you live. So.
Yeah, that's one thing during the pandemic, I didn't guess that it was going to go on quite as long as it did. I was traveling so much pre-pandemic that I'm like, I don't really grow stuff. They can't die. And so what I should have done is planted a whole bunch of things out in my little courtyard at that time, but never got it together and did it. And I still haven't, which I should. I'm always like, well, if I plant something, then the trips will start again. So that I should plant something to sacrifice just so I can, go to Italy with Olivia on our plant foraging adventure.
Yeah, I think you can just go to Italy with Olivia and just let the plants die. Like you have my permission to just sacrifice a couple of mint plants and go.
I was so fortunate to get to learn about conservational foraging recently on a trip when I got to go to Braulio with Eddie, actually, who I'm filling in for Eddie, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that in the beginning. I should have. Everyone knows Eddie Hansel from Campari Academy. I'm filling in for him today. But Eddie and I were foraging with Alex as well, my West Coast counterpart, and we learned about conservational foraging, basically things that are growing in invasive plants that are edible, and that, it's a great way to like sustainably go out and help the environment in that way, but also bring these really cool flavors to your cocktails.
Oh, that's cool.
Amy, did you do any live plant foresting, harvesting visits in the research for Drunken Botanist?
Not as much, so my goal with this book was, I understood that there's this tremendous interest in all of these ingredients, and going to events like Tales and other things like that, I could see that people were just super into it. They really wanted to geek out on the very, very specifics of every single ingredient. But they weren't necessarily people who had a lot of botanical knowledge. And this was my sixth book about the plant world. And I knew how to get botanists on the phone. Like, I'm not a botanist, but I know how to talk to them. And I knew how to get into that world. And I thought, I'm going to build a little bridge here, and I'm going to go get the botanists. And so, really, a lot of my research was about trying to track down the particular person who had made it their life's work to study a particular plant, and to just get them talking. Because when you, as you know, when you really sort of talk to someone in person, you get all this information from them that you don't get with an email or whatever. And so, speaking of wild plants, and speaking of also of Campari, one of the experts I talked to was this professor at Rutgers, Lena Strew, who specializes in gentian, which is that bitter. Everybody on this call knows what that is, but I'll just say, it is this very bitter flavor that also has a little bit of that orange peel, like you just bit into the rind of an orange kind of flavor to it. And I'm telling this story because, Camper, you wrote the book that really needed to be written about the connection between these plants and medicine. I've always really shied away from writing about medicinal plants because I don't want people to take my information the wrong way and go make some really irresponsible decisions about it. But one of the things that Lena Strew told me about gentian is that it's a great example of a plant that gets made into amari and all digestives and all kinds of things, where you can experience the medicinal effects of it every time you take a sip. So anytime gentian comes into your mouth, the nerve endings in your mouth talk to your brain and tell your brain to start producing more digestive fluids throughout your whole body. You don't even have to swallow it. It's all happening in your mouth. You could spit it out and this would still happen. And so one of the things that will happen is you'll start drooling more. And so I'm always like telling audiences, like, next time have like a Campari soda, or have and take a little sip and notice that you're drooling more. And you can think of our time together here today and what you learned. But it's an actual medicinal effect of a plant that you can test out on yourself, safely. But it's being used, like in Europe, there's a lot of investigation right now into using it for people who've had like cancer treatments and maybe they can't swallow. They have to get their like you have radiation or something in your glands up here. So it's still being used as a medicine today, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah, and I think there were some scientific studies with gentian that were like, okay, we've proved it. It does,
Yes.
Help digestion or get those juices flowing, which it's clear, it's obvious, but it's nice to have, the PNAS journal or whatever confirm some of those studies.
Yeah.
So that it's not just people say
Which
that.
there's so much of, especially in the plant world. It's just so much just folklore and not really backed by a lot of science. And something gets repeated over and over again, and it starts to seem like it's true. And then you realize, like, oh, there's actually no evidence of this.
Yeah, actually, for this talk, I wrote a quote from the intro of your book where you address that the history of drinking is riddled with legends, distortions, half-truths, and outright lies. I didn't think any field of study could be more prone to myths and misstatements than botany, but that was before I started researching cocktails.
Right.
And for me, I was like, I didn't realize that like plants weren't like done. And picks, they have Latin names, they have nomenclature. I thought plants were figured out. And it's really the first time through Drunken Botanist, I don't think I really picked up on it, how much not true that is, other than you're saying, oh, well, now it's been recategorized to something else, which happens, I think, so much. And I would always go through and like, are these the same plant? That was my question, because plants can have multiple names, particularly the Latin names, depending on which botanist categorized it. Is that?
Yeah, well, right. So what happens in botany is that a plant can have a common name like, daisy or Douglas fir or whatever. And it's just and it can have a lot of different versions of that. And that's just a word we use. It's sort of meaningless. And then its Latin name should be fixed. But what happens is science is, we're always learning more, and science is ever evolving and ever changing. And so taxonomists will come along and go, you know what, we think we were wrong about that. We think that plant does not belong over here with these other plants. We think it's actually a member of this other, this other family. And so they recategorize it and rename it. And this drives plant geeks crazy because they've just learned how to pronounce, Verbena bonariensis, and now it's not called Verbena bonariensis anymore, and they got to learn a new name. And what's starting to happen most recently is that now we can use DNA testing to really sort of settle that. But it's very hit and miss. A lot of botanical research is just who has the funding at that particular moment to study that particular thing. So when you're talking about medicinal plants and you're wondering like, well, is this even true? Is this plant really, does this do anything for indigestion? Does it do anything for fevers or not? It could be that no one's really gotten around to going back and confirming that. I wrote a book about poisonous plants as well, and the same's true with plant poisons. Like, it's amazing how much we still don't know about poisonous plants. How much of the plant would it take to kill a person? Are the seeds more poisonous than the leaves? All that kind of stuff. So, yeah, if you're looking to make a career change, the field's wide open. There's a lot you can go study in botany and make brand new discoveries and contribute to science.
Yeah, the poison comes up a lot because I also have this interest in safety in cocktails, and I have the website Cocktail Safe. And one thing like sassafras being illegal, the saffrole being not a legal ingredient to use in the United States, along with the coumarin that's in bison grass and tonka beans, but only in the United States, not in Canada, not in Europe, and all of that. And a lot of those, as you indicated, at least for I think the saffrole, was that it's not that we know for sure that it's super poisonous to humans at some level. It's that it was suspected and then banned for use, and then no one's felt the need to do the science to find out like how true is it and at what level. So none for you.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Right. So, here in the U.S., we have the FDA who decides what food ingredients are generally recognized as safe, and those are the things that you can sell in a whatever you want to, food or drink you want to sell. But then going beyond that, there's everything that's not on that list. Is sort of it's kind of open season. So people go foraging. They find some new plant that maybe hasn't been used all that much, and they want to experiment with it. And this is where alarm bells can sometimes really go off for me, because I wrote a book about poisonous plants before I wrote Drunken Botanist. I'm always like, whoa, let's slow way down here before we put that in a drink. Like, you only get one liver, so how adventurous do you really want to be? And I felt like I was kind of, in some places, overdoing it in Drunken Botanist by putting those warnings in. But as time has gone on, I'm sort of glad I did. And I think for you, with doctors and distillers, what you were able to do more than I could do was really look at the very powerful effects that these plants have on how our bodies function. And sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad, right? We can have a plant ingredient that speeds up your heart rate or slows your heart rate down. And that can be a heart medicine, like digitalis is made from foxglove, which is a pretty flower. And so it's great as a medicine, but also could be very deadly for someone to take who wasn't treating that particular heart condition. So like this whole history of plants with alcohol and with medicine is all so closely intertwined.
Yeah, it really is in ways that I had no idea. I took a couple notes during the past 5 minutes. One plant that I think changed taxonomically, or at least how we talk about it, is important to everyone watching: agave. It seems, at least when I first got into the industry, agave was considered a relative of the lily, and now people say asparagus. Is that Is that
Yes.
where we are? Do you know?
Yeah, you're exactly right. There's been a lot of work. Taxonomists have done a lot of work on the lily family and splitting certain plants out. And you can see it if you. It's interesting because sometimes you can sort of tell by looking at a plant. Sometimes it's a physical characteristic that makes a lot of sense. So if you look at an agave when it blooms, it puts up that big stalk. It looks like a giant asparagus stalk. So you're like, oh, I get it. And even when it flowers, if you've ever seen asparagus flower, like if you've seen it in the field where it's left to go to seed, it's like, oh, yeah, I can definitely see how they're connected. And, like another example would be in the carrot family. There's a lot of very similar plants that they all have that long taproot. They all put out these little seeds, and sort of once you realize that, you're like, oh, I get why these flavors work together. I get, I get why these are related. And in other cases, you can't tell at all. You're like, I have no idea why they put these two plants in the same family.
Yeah, that's me most of the
Yeah.
time. And one thing, talking this danger in plants, which it's the dangerous plants that make the strongest medicine. It turns out, but I had posted something on Twitter, RIP Twitter, a few years ago, and I was like, it seems to me that everything that goes into vermouth is actually a form of insect repellent. And you replied to it, and something along the lines of, the battle between plants trying not to get eaten by bugs creates some of the, most interesting compounds and flavors and all of that. And that, which brings us into, well, one, that's fascinating, that it never really occurred to me that bark's protecting themselves with tannins, and cinchona being super bitter, maybe that keeps bugs away as well. And all of these defense mechanisms, not to keep humans out, but it ends up being, we like to biohack ourselves with things like, oh, this is bitter, but now my tummy's rumbling and I like that. So or now I'm wired because it's caffeine and I'm gonna biohack those plants, but those plants weren't in it for us.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, they have their own agenda. Plants are mostly, they're mostly trying to survive and reproduce, and they're not really thinking about us. So mostly their communication network is all with insects and other creatures. And so you take, like, lavender is a good example. Like, we love the way lavender smells, and it smells that way in part to attract pollinators. So that's one reason that a plant could produce fragrance, but it's also trying to ward off insects. And so the more mentholated medicinal fragrance in lavender is this oil that it produces that makes it very unpleasant to eat, so that they'll survive. And so that's, of course, the same with poisons, anything that's poison to us, hemlock or whatever. Like, hemlock's not exactly trying to kill us. It's just trying to live. It's just trying to make it very unpleasant, trying to punish anyone who tries to eat it, because plants don't have a lot of other defense mechanisms. So what are you going to do?
That's so interesting. We have an interesting question here regarding blue spruce. So considering adding blue spruce to a holiday cocktail, while we've read that all spruce tips are edible, it's a spring thing, do you think it would be okay to snip Christmas trees?
Oh, that's interesting. I do think it's okay. I'm not aware of any poisons in spruce trees, and generally in conifers. I don't think there's a lot of horrible, dangerous, deadly poisons. But it is true that if you're like infusing them into a spirit, you normally take the young growing tips in early spring. I think the flavors are a little more accessible and a little more friendly on the palate. And this time of year, it's older growth that's kind of oxidized and maybe isn't quite as delightful. But I don't think there's any harm in it that I'm aware of.
So more of a flavor impact.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, some kinds of juniper we know are, which is not a conifer plant, right? That's more of a shrub tree in between.
Oh, yeah, but you're right. Juniper's a conifer, and yeah, you want to be somewhat careful with junipers.
I'd heard some of them were problematic, and someone was trying to do a California gin and ran into thujone levels in juniper, which that was new to me, because if you use grand wormwood, Artemisia absinthium, in your beverage product, you have to have it tested and submit those tests to the TTB. As far as I know, if you're using juniper, you don't have to do that, but someone sort of just ran afoul with a plant from some California plant. I thought it was juniper that they were trying to put in, and they had to take it out because they crossed that line somehow.
Well, that's interesting, and I think that's another thing we sort of forget, is that a lot of different unrelated plants can produce the same chemical. So thujone is an example. It's a chemical that's made by a lot of different plants. It's in ordinary garden sage that you're going to probably, eat at Thanksgiving in your Thanksgiving turkey. And yeah, Artemisia absinthium and lots of other plants that are completely unrelated to one another are all making the same chemical. So yeah, it can turn up.
So I got, after you talked about bugs on that tweet, I got into bugs kind of because I got into cochineal more. I was, of course, into mosquitoes because I first geeked out on malaria and mosquitoes, and I don't even like studying mosquitoes. They make me itch. And but then I really got into cochineal and the history of that, and the coloring, but just like it led me down this into insects, which of course you've got a book to address as well. Wicked bugs, which those were both for folks who haven't read, before Drunken Botanist was Wicked Plants and Wicked Bugs.
Right. Yeah. And it's, it's kind of the same thing. Like, this is what happens when you're doing research, like I was doing all this research into plant poisons and interviewing toxicologists and stuff for wicked plants. And it's just a real short step from plant poisons to insect venoms. So I was collecting all these stories, and I thought, all right, well, I have to do one for bugs as well. And so then in Drunken Botanist, there is this little section called Bugs and Booze that's just about the ways that, the different roles that insects have played. And cochineal is a great example. It's this minuscule little insect, but it produces this red dye that's essentially red coloring that's been used forever. So yeah, it's fascinating how that stuff comes up. But of course, it makes sense in our history because you're growing plants, there's going to be a lot of bugs around. Like, it's all the same experience.
Yeah, I then started collecting. So I have in my file system, I have all sorts of notes. Anytime I encounter a new bug form, I'm like, yeah, I'll put that in the bug file, and I get very excited. And I have some like stink bugs or something. I forget what it is about them that you can get back to booze. Oh, they have the same poison as bitter almonds. I think that's the stink is the amygdalin, something like that, that turns into cyanide in the human body when you process bitter almonds. And so I found a connection. Eureka. So, and speaking of like taking notes, and this is kind of going in a different direction for a second, but I had watched you told about your organizing system, and I think for your notes, for particularly your historical fiction books, and but a lot of the people watching today, I think, keep a lot of notes on drinks and recipes and have some sort of system for that. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about, and if you still are using Evernote as heavily as you were.
Yeah. I use Evernote for all my research. And so Evernote is an app, but also a website, and also a piece of software you can put on your desktop. And what I like about it is that I can just capture everything no matter what form it's in. So I can, like, if I'm reading a paper book, I can take a picture of a page and it'll extract that text as a readable, searchable piece of text. So all of those kind of notes, photographs out in the real world, importing documents, it's all fully searchable. So it's made my life so much easier to just have everything in one place, because even I wasn't using it for Drunken Botanist. And so Drunken Botanist was a mess, I mean, I have boxes and boxes of physically printed out stuff, and I have audio recordings of interviews I did. And as you can imagine, photographs and PDFs, and some things are emails, and Evernote lets you consolidate all of that. Like even an email, you can forward it to Evernote and it will keep it with everything else. So that's made it so much easier. But and I often think about, like, because I grew up as a pre-digital, in the pre-digital age, and I just think about the boxes and boxes of files that I would have had if I tried to write this book in the 70s. Actually, I couldn't have written it. I mean, it would have taken a lifetime to write this book.
Yeah.
But yeah. So anyway, that's how I keep it all organized.
Nice. I've started to move to, it turns out the Notes app on an iPhone is incredibly powerful.
Yes.
Almost on an Evernote level.
Right.
Like it can do that scanning of the
Yes.
image on text and stuff. So Evernote's doubling in price. So I'm also like, maybe it's time to, I love a good file system, on the hard drive. That really is something that thrills me. But, I don't have a lot of outside thrills in my life. So it's file systems for me.
I'm admiring your book selection and organization behind you.
Oh yeah, the lack thereof when it comes to the organization. I moved them and sort of stuck them temporarily in it, and they just got stuck that way for the most part. They're sort of like newer medicine books are over there. These are all like malaria.
I'm like, what's the queue? What are we needing to read still?
They're mostly there at home, but I think I have finished most of those.
I love knowing what my favorite authors are reading. I think that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, actually, I was going to bring that up to find out what Amy's reading, but what I was reading this week, more on water. I read a lot about water.
Yes.
Drinking water and brands of water, and I'm going to lead some classes on water for Dry January, and or try all the different bottled stuff. I'm like, now you can order exotic bottled waters on Amazon, and this is how I'm poor, because I just found a very exciting water to buy, but it's $100 for
research.
You can only get a case, but it's like, I'm probably going to buy it. I can't resist. And then this scholarly book that's Alcohol in Latin America.
Oh, that's fantastic.
It is, it's a series of chapters that are individual papers, and some really interesting stuff in there that I didn't know. And it's actually all the way down to Peru, and there's new cachaça information, but a lot of stuff on like sort of the cultural symbolism of pulque versus mezcal versus tequila versus beer versus European wine in Mexico. Like a mind-blowing chapter right there. So I had requested this. My thing I do for fun besides filing systems is I find nerdy books I want to read and request that the public library carry those books, particularly the more expensive ones, and then they'll get approved or denied. When they're approved, I'm like, yes, you've done something. And then I'll read those books, of course. So that's one of those, and I'm like, yeah, I did that.
Yeah, well, Interlibrary Loan is my friend. The little tiny rural library where I lived when I wrote Drunken Botanist would get books that there's only one copy, and it's at a library in LA, and through Interlibrary Loan, they get it to me for a couple of weeks. It's very helpful. Yeah, for sure.
We have a good question in the chat that's interesting to kind of go back a little bit to some of the safety issues around specific plants, but someone was wondering if you can speak to the safety issues of soaking cherry pits or other stone fruit seeds in alcohol. Seeing folks claim that it's both totally safe, but others that can say it can be converted into cyanide.
So here's what I would say about this, and this is going to be more of a general statement about soaking things in alcohol. So alcohol is a solvent. And when you put anything in a solvent, but in this case, let's say a plant, when you put a plant in a solvent, the alcohol is going to extract whatever it can get pretty indiscriminately. So any chemicals or oils or whatever that plant makes, if those things are soluble in alcohol, the alcohol is going to grab it and pull it out. So not everything's soluble in alcohol, right? So I don't know why I keep using lavender as an example, but lavender is a great example. It's fats. The chemicals in lavender that we like the most are fat soluble, and it's why really ancient perfumes were made with plants soaked in a fat. It was like a cream that you would apply more than a liquid. So anytime you're putting anything in alcohol, you don't exactly know what you're getting. I mean, the alcohol is going to decide what it can get hold of and what it can extract and what it can't. So it's a very imprecise way of doing this, with kind of imprecise results. So that's my general statement, but my specific statement is I actually don't know. I haven't seen any research specifically on cherry pits going into alcohol. Camper, maybe you know, but
I've seen some estimates. Darcy O'Neill actually did an estimate with I don't think it was cherry pits, but with nor was it bitter almonds, but it was apricot pits. I think these are all related, if I understand botany correctly, my limited understanding. And so they all contain the same compound that isn't cyanide, but when you digest it, it turns into cyanide. But it might be possible to turn that off by heating it, but you have to crush it first. And so again, very imprecise, but yeah, there definitely there's poison in all of those stone fruit pits and bitter almonds and cherry pits at a certain level. And what that level is, and here's the problem, is that like, how do we know? And that's, I'm always like, err on the side of safety. When in doubt, if you poison yourself, that's less bad than poisoning other people. So that's where I draw the line. Like, I'll eat anything. It fell on the floor, fine. 2-day rule. But but I wouldn't serve floor food to my guests. And I think the same way about most things. If they're iffy, like, when in doubt, leave it out.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, let's see. And
I wanted to get back to what you're talking about Latin America. I'm so glad that book is out. I think one of the things that we really miss in the booze world is really thinking very, very globally. We tend to think a lot about North America, and we tend to think a lot about Europe, which is fantastic. But we leave out Latin America, we leave out Africa, we leave out India. We tend to often leave out China, and less so. We seem to be a little bit more connected with Japan, but there's massive regions of the world and huge percentages of the global population that have some kind of drinking culture that we don't really talk about, and we seem to be less interested in. And for me as a plant person, I'm sort of interested in plants all over the world, right? Like, plant geeks always want to go where they're not allowed to go, and where they do want to go hiking in remote mountains in China to find that plant that only grows in that one place. So I wanted to be very global. And I'm sure you thought about this too, in terms of with doctors and distillers and medicine. Like, how can I move this beyond North America and Europe and really look globally at our traditions of plants and medicine? So I think in general, kind of looking forward and thinking about what's interesting to investigate and research and look at more, it really is remembering, like, what about all the people who live in Africa? Let's look at that. Let's look more at Latin America. Let's look more at India. Let's think about China, Thailand, Vietnam, and be a little bit more global in our outlook. So.
For sure. That was something I really struggled with, as far as also the documented history of medicine. And I was like, well, I was tried not to write too much about traditional medicine, formerly known as folk medicine, in different cultures, because I wanted there to be a structure that I could cite. The reason why that you take wormwood is to cure the whatever humor the Greeks were thinking of.
Right.
And in that sort of logical format, I can understand that, and you apply it in certain ways, but without, at least the research I was able to do, wasn't able to find a whole lot of that. It might be like, oh, this is a plant traditionally used, for example, by the indigenous Americans. Sarsaparilla and sassafras were used for a lot of things, and then Europeans came in and were like, yoink, that must cure syphilis. so that stuff is interesting, but without the structure behind it, I struggled and I couldn't do enough. And my tequila section of Doctors and Distillers is like the smallest, saddest. And of course, I picked up stuff from this book that just came out, Alcohol in Latin America, that I was like,
Right.
oh, if I only waited, 3 more years.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Is there anything you're reading now? What's on your?
I don't know that I have anything super interesting to report on other than just, fun novels that I'm reading for fun right now. I just finished writing, my next book is about trees. So I went through a year or two of kind of reading everything about trees. And so sort of just taking a break and reading novels for fun at the moment.
Yeah, that was actually something I wanted to bring up, because you stayed similar but moved around in your studies of plants and bugs and booze and plants and all of that. Do you get filled up with some information and then need to move along to something else, or at least take a break from it?
Yeah, well, what's really interesting to me is to write about people. So, like I've written 6 books about plants, and then this new tree book will be the 7th one. And really, they're not really about plants, but really about people and the way people intersect with plants. So, like I wrote a book about the global cut flower industry. And it's sort of a book about flowers, but it's really a book where I went all over the world and talked to people who work in the floral business and sort of what motivates them, and where do humans and plants come together, and what are the stories about that. So in the botanical world, this is called economic botany. That's what they call the intersection of plants and people specifically. So plants used as money, plants used as medicine, obviously plants as food, as textiles, as art, all of those things. So in that sense, they all feel to me like they hang together, but I think they can look sort of disjointed from the outside a little bit.
Nice.
There's actually a college class. I think it's at Purdue. They're teaching a college class called the Drunken Botanist, and they're actually going to be doing tastings if you're 21 or older, they had to do all this special permission with the university, but tastings in the class, and then they're doing a class trip to I want to say Slovenia maybe as part of it. So when they reached out to me, I was like, there are like 1 million bartenders who want to take this class. I want to take the class. I could have used this class. And they're like, we couldn't have done this class without the book. And I'm like, I could have really done a better book if I'd had the class. But that area of botany is sort of interesting to academics as well, because it's very engaging for students to think about plants as they connect to people. So it's been very gratifying to see botanists in academia sort of embrace the book and go, oh, I think we could actually sort of do something with this.
I hope they'll come to think the same thing about booze and medicine from the medical schools.
No, I can totally see your book being taken up also because the thing is, for colleges, they're always looking for like an interesting, engaging book to assign to students as opposed to a textbook. And so Doctors and Distillers is that, it really sort of satisfies that curiosity and goes pretty deep, but it's also just like fun to sit and read. It's not like a textbook that you're sort of being forced to slog your way through. So
right.
I could do that.
Perfect mix of fact and stories, and really interesting.
Yeah, and the recipes are only there because the publisher kind of wanted them, but
I know,
but they are there.
Right. I know, yeah.
And then they wanted more. I put in I think 20 the first pass, and then I think there's a lot in it. It's a pause rather than having a graphic, because I didn't really get to use a lot of those in the book.
Right.
We've got a recipe. There's too much text in a row. Let's put an absinthe drip in here.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Give you space
Right.
for the next. What makes Drunken Botanist so easy to read is that there are a lot of shorter sections, and you get to an end. There's a lot of great convenient stopping places. And when I first did the outline for Doctors and Distillers, it was going to be organized ingredient by ingredient. There's a gin chapter and a wormwood chapter or whatever. And because so much had common history with each other, all spirits stem from the same thing essentially. It didn't make sense. I didn't want to repeat and keep saying, because I can't help myself from saying, as I wrote earlier in the book, or as you read in chapter 3, and it's so obnoxious to read that stuff, but I can't help myself. I'm like, oh, I know that I said it before. Like that's a me problem, really, not a reader problem. Anyway, so I had to do it chronologically, and really wanted those. The recipes were good for pauses. I think those are my sub-chapter breaks in a way.
Exactly. Yeah. Makes sense.
Amy, I use Drunken Botanist as a reference all the time, just it's so easy, kind of, as Kemper said, to kind of go through and find the one thing you're looking for, read about it, refresh your memory, and then go back into practical use with it.
Well, that's good. I really wrote this book for all of you. I mean, when I was sort of working with my editor and editing the book, sometimes she would want to cut a few paragraphs out somewhere, and she would be like, "This is getting too much in the weeds. I think we can lose this." And I was like, "You don't understand. There is a distiller in Wisconsin whose head is going to explode when they read that thing. Like, I worked so hard to find that fact. No one knows it. It is disproving a common myth. Like, we are not cutting that." And so I really kind of had to explain to my publisher, like, I don't think you understand the world of like cocktail geeks and what's interesting to them. And this is for them. Like, other people are going to pick it up who are more casual drinkers or casual gardeners. And that's great. They're going to love it too. But we are not cutting any of the like cool, weird, deep technical stuff that took me a week and a half to track down one sentence's worth of information. We're keeping that.
Thank you for fighting the good fight.
Totally.
We have an interesting question that I would love to raise kind of before we get sort of to some of the end, and we can do some more Q&A maybe, but someone brought up cannabis. So have you tried any of the new cannabis beverage products on the market, or do you have any thoughts on their use with or without alcohol?
Well, one thing that's interesting, the laws in different states are, of course, wildly different. I do like the California law that's basically they can't put the two together. You can't sell them or allow them to be consumed in the same space. Essentially, it could be a cannabis club, or you can have a bar, but the two shall not meet. And I think that's based on some real known combined effects between the two, which you really have to worry about. And I don't know how well studied that is. It's a little studied, but I don't think it's can't say, oh, it's by a factor of 3, you'll be more impaired. For example, I've only tried a limited number of cannabis beverages, and they're cool, but like it's not the thing that I'm going deep into personally. Like I could get into it recreationally, I suppose, but I just haven't. There's too much liquor to drink first.
Compartmentalize.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I live in Oregon, and all that stuff is easy to get here. So for sure, the CBD beverages are, I just got one at the grocery store yesterday and had it with my lunch. Like, they're awesome. And the THC ones are also fairly easy to get. In terms of combining them with alcohol, yeah, I sort of agree. I think, the issue with all edibles is that we don't know exactly what their effects are going to be for, an hour or so. So it's going to come on quite a bit later, as opposed to when you're drinking, you know exactly when you've had a little too much and you need to stop. So it's combining the two can sort of mean that you end up on a train that you can't get off of. And you're going to just have to, I assume that many of us have probably experienced that with edibles. You're like, oh boy, what was I thinking an hour and a half ago? I can't go back now. So I think that's sort of the issue. You combine those two, and then you have someone who's maybe an inexperienced user of cannabis, and they're not going to get that signal that you get with alcohol when it's time to stop. So I don't know. I don't know where that's going to go.
One thing I was going to ask when it comes to plant utility, because we've talked about medicine and alcohol, but perfume and plant, is that something that you start? I kept running into it. Interestingly, a lot of cosmetics even more so than perfume, are in medical literature, old medical literature, which was news to me. I had no idea that they would always be together until, I don't know, 1500. And but perfume's a little bit, but more in the Arabic distilling tradition of rose waters and such like that. But is that something that you've learned about?
Right. Yeah. I mean, same thing. Same for me. Right. So the process to extract those fragrance molecules from a plant, it's the same thing. Perfumers have to figure out, is this molecule soluble in alcohol or water or fat? Probably it's one of those three things. But which one is it? And how do we do it? How do we get it out? And of course, our sense of smell and our sense of taste are almost the same thing, right? So those volatile flavor molecules, and in fact, you notice it. So I do a lot of talks for kind of garden audiences who aren't super sophisticated drinkers necessarily. So I'm explaining things to them like, you should be using fresh citrus, not old, not some. Don't squeeze your limes, the day before, for crying out loud. But I explain it kind of in almost perfume terms, because when you squeeze a lemon, the whole kitchen fills up with this fragrance. And that's because those molecules are very volatile and they have literally gone into the air. They're not in your drink, they're in the air. And the more of them that leave and go in the air and go away, that leaves behind these other unpleasant, more bitter molecules that we don't like as much, that also kind of oxidize and change as they're exposed to. So you don't get as pleasant a taste as you do with fresh citrus. And so I think it's sort of a good example of how, the those very volatile fragrant molecules, like the ones in perfume, tend to be very, they'll just kind of aerosol. They'll just sort of, basil's another great example, like basil's great when it's fresh. You don't want to cook it or dry it, because all those fantastic molecules have left. They've gone in the air. They've gone away. And what's left is kind of not quite so delicious. So there's this interesting interplay between perfume makers and cooks, and also distillers or bartenders, because we're all trying to capture those very delicate, very volatile fragrances and keep them for our palate, keep them as something that we can experience when we put it in our mouth, even though what we're experiencing is actually the fragrance, but it's happening as we're eating or drinking.
And I don't know if you know this, but the fat washing technique is based on enfleurage, the perfumer technique of putting flowers into like lard or some other fatty substance to extract them there, and then getting from there, taking it to alcohol or distilling it, which is another good perfume into plants to perfume to liquor connection.
Right. And so there again, when you put something into fat, that fat is only going to extract the fat soluble, whatever is in there that's fat, whatever is available to it, right? It's just going to grab that. It's not going to grab anything and everything. So understanding what things are fat soluble versus water soluble versus soluble in alcohol is a big piece of all this.
So interesting. I want to remind everyone that we have the Campari Academy gift pack. So don't forget to enter pdxcw.com/thedrunkenbotanist. I have enjoyed this conversation so deeply. I think we could talk for many, many hours, and I would like to. Is there anything else that, you're super excited about or inspired by right now that you're wanting to kind of close with or thinking about as we leave this botanical trail of thoughts with people?
Go for it. I love that. I just like botanical trails of thought.
I know, many botanical trails of thought. But what I want to say is that I think that something we're all so interested in is seasonal and local. And this is something we were talking about Italy beforehand. And, this is something the Italians do so brilliantly, is that they work with what's in season and they work with what's around them, and they get incredible flavors out of anything and everything because that's what they do. And so right now we're in the middle of winter, and there's some incredible citrus coming into the market right now. So I have a friend who sends me a big box of Texas Ruby Red grapefruits every year, and they're fantastic right now. And blood oranges are about to come on, and it's this one time of year when you can make fantastic drinks with blood oranges. So, a thing about anything you do that involves plants is that plants have their season and they have their time and their place. And so if you want to in any way expand your repertoire and expand how you work with plants, I would think in terms of expanding it seasonally. Like I have a friend down the street with a persimmon tree, and she gave me a big bag of persimmons, which have been, you have to wait till they get super, super soft before you can use them. And they have just reached that like yesterday. So like today is going to begin me sort of figuring out like, what can I do with this? And what have we done with persimmons and drinks? So I would just encourage you. Also pomegranates. Every year around this time, we go out and buy a bunch of pomegranates and make our own grenadine, which we keep in a big jar in the freezer and just use all year long. So think seasonally, and winter is a season. There's legit great stuff in winter to track down.
I love when people don't realize that citrus is fresh and in season in the winter. I love that revelation. Like, wait a minute. It's such a kind thing. The universe gives us this sunshine in the time that we need it the most.
Yes. Well, largely, thank you, California, and thank you, Florida,
Right.
and somewhat Georgia and somewhat Texas. But yes, we're very grateful for all that citrus, and this is definitely the time to get into it.
Yeah, it wasn't until I moved to California that I learned that. I had no concept that citrus is a winter thing. And in fact, I learned from San Francisco bartenders, they're like, yeah, the rain's been good. Next year, citrus is going to be real, thick. Like, how did you do? That was
witchcraft.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
Someone Casey is asking a question. What would you tell someone considering writing a cocktail related book in today's overabundant market?
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I would say, first of all, try to find the thing that no one else has done. This sounds so obvious, but try to find your particular perspective on it and find the thing that no one else has done and that people are super into, and try to find an approach to it that you don't think anyone else can take. I sort of thought anybody could write The Drunken Botanist, but nobody did. And it's not likely to be repeated. Like, who would bother to go to all the work to do the same thing about all these plants, right? Whereas if I had just written a book about like seasonal drinks you can make from your garden, like a new version of that book's going to come out every few years. So I would just say try to find your own particular thing, and it might involve travel, it might involve talking to people that no one else is talking to, and really make it yours.
And additionally, the publishers really want to see platform that you are the expert and establish it. A lot of people do that through videos. The people who end up with foraging cocktail books are people who have foraging Instagram channels, etc. So it is, from the book deal perspective, to have shown experience in it, in whatever your topic is. But it also helps establish your expertise, and that's research you're going to have to do anyway.
Creating your brand too, in that way. Both of you have done that so well with your specific expertise, and I love how it's branched out into these other kind of, no pun intended, like ways of learning new things as well.
Thank you.
Good stuff.
Yeah. Well, I just love this conversation. I think we should do this more. And I'm getting a lot of ideas for some Campari Academy field guides around some and in-season things. We do the field guides on the CampariAcademy.com, where we have all sorts of resources and things like that. So I'm getting very inspired during this conversation. But Amy and Kemper, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been probably one of the coolest things I've been part of as far as things I'm inspired by. And I think you two are both absolutely the experts in our field. And we're so lucky to get to hear from you directly and ask you our questions directly. To everybody watching, if you enjoyed this class, don't forget to show some love. And if you want to see some more Portland Week cocktail classes like this, don't forget to follow Portland Cocktail Week on Facebook. And we have the raffle going, so don't forget about that also. I first met Camper when we did the Campari Academy book club. So if this is something you're super into, if you are a certified bibliophile, join the Campari Academy book club. Follow CampariCommunity.com and at Campari Academy for you Instagrammers. Speaking of that, if you aren't already following Amy and Camper, we have Camper at Alcademics and Amy at Amy Stewart. For all things plant powered. And then I'm Aperol Liv for all of your Italian East Coast portfolio Campari things. And then we have Academy Eddie, who again, I'm filling in for today. He is an incredible source of knowledge and runs the Academy here in New York and nationally. So if you've seen our Portland Cocktail Week classes, or if we see you at Tales, please say hi. This has been a really, really incredible chat. I would love to give you two the opportunity for any closing remarks before we hang up, but this has been awesome.
I just want to say, I want to say thanks to everybody in the cocktail community. You guys have meant a lot to me over the years, and I'm so grateful for the way that you've embraced this book. And I love hearing from people that something I did made their jobs more interesting or meaningful. For some reason, that just really connects with me. So I love being able to give you something that might be of use to you in your career, and you've given me a lot too. So thank you for that.
And I feel the same about giving people more to learn about, to put some respect on your name of bartending, and the expertise that you all have, that I learned so much from before I was able to even venture out on my own a little bit and bring new information into the community. So that's very satisfying for me as well. Like, look, guys, I learned something for you now. Thanks for reading, and I think both of us hope you enjoy our work, and we look forward to seeing everyone around.
We have a request for more bug talk in 2024, so let's pick this up again and go into that deeper.
Okay.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to everybody watching and joining. Thank you to Portland Cocktail Week for continually supporting the community and putting all this great content and education out there.
All right. Thank you, Campari.
Cheers.